Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In this edition of Global Print, I'm going to talk to you about Nepal and tell you how India's foreign policy these past 7 years since the Modi government has come to power has changed the most, not with the US or Russia or Pakistan, but with Nepal. But before that, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe and pay just a little bit for ThePrint's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. You know that we have been bringing to you the best news stories, the best videos over these last several months of the pandemic. So please do continue to support us. You will find in the description of this video a link both to subscribe for an international audience as well as for a domestic one. So back to my column Global Print this week, in which I talked to you about India's changing position on Nepal, and this column on the website that appeared on Tuesday. Subsequently, the Ministry of External Affairs has also reacted and in fact confirms my article, which talks about India's hands-off approach on Nepal. So I'd like to make 3 points here. The first is the behaviour of Prime Minister K P Oli, Nepal's Prime Minister K P Oli, and we've seen how over the last few weeks, in fact, just in this month of May, how he has become the Prime Minister twice, although he has lost the vote of confidence in the House. And now the second time around, how he has recommended to the President that the House be dissolved, which President Bidya Bhandari has done very willingly. And now elections in Nepal are going to be slated for November. And we know that in the last 6 months, the first time that Prime Minister K P Oli recommended a dissolution of the House was in December 2020, following which the opposition, the Nepalese opposition, went to the Supreme Court, and subsequently in March, the Supreme Court threw out that move to dissolve the House. But Prime Minister Oli has done it again. And the Nepali press, you should read some of the Nepali press, whether it's the Kantipur Nepali language paper or its sister paper, the Kathmandu Post, and several other Nepali language dailies and magazines, which talk about how the Nepalese President Bidya Bhandari has been co-opted, if you like, by Prime Minister K P Oli. And with her help, he has in fact mangled the constitution and twisted the clauses and conventions just so that he can remain in power. The second point I'd like to make in my column, which I do make in my column, is India's behaviour. Now, we saw just about a year ago, in fact it was last May, when Prime Minister K P Oli changed Nepal's map. And in fact, that was passed in Parliament and unilaterally incorporated, cartographically, of course, because obviously nothing like that happened on the ground. But the Nepal's map was changed to include territories that are part of India. 3 territories in particular: Kalapani, Lipul Lake, and Limpi-Adhura. And at the time, last May, Prime Minister K P Oli was very critical of India's national emblem, the Ashoka Chakra, and crudely dismissed it by saying, is this Satyamev Jayate or Singhamev Jayate, basically saying that India's hegemonic designs is what has led it to take Nepali territory, and Nepal was just doing the right thing by taking it back. Of course, as you can imagine, India saw red at the time. And there was a lot of back and forth, the Ministry of External Affairs issuing statements and in background briefings saying that this was completely unacceptable. The Army Chief General M.M. Naravane, even, although it was quite undiplomatic on his part, even said that the Nepalese Prime Minister was doing this at the behest of another country, meaning China. So around the time that Prime Minister Oli was doing all this and saying all these things, the Chinese ambassador to Nepal, Madame Hu Yonchi, was also very active. She was reaching out not just to the Prime Minister, but to the various communist leaders, to the Communist Party leaders in Nepal. And at the time, the leaders all were very divided amongst themselves. There was Prachand, or Pushpa Kumar Dahal, as we know, is his real name. There's Baburam Bhattarai, who subsequently split away and formed his own party. And of course, Prime Minister Oli himself, the 3 big Communist Party leaders, apart from Jhalanath Khanal and Madhav Nepal. So various factions of the Communist Party, which had at the time had already been united but had differing opinions among themselves. So Prime Minister Oli's moves on India by changing the map of Nepal, incorporating, cartographically incorporating Indian territory, did not go down well at all. But subsequently we see that some changes are now taking place. So Prime Minister Oli reaches out to India. He calls Prime Minister Modi on August 15, that's on the occasion of India's Independence Day. And subsequently in October, the head of India's external intelligence, the RNAW, Mr. Samant Goyal, flies to Nepal with a colleague named Arun Jain. And in quick succession, you have the visit of Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla, as well as the Army Chief General Naravane. And in December, you have the visit of the head of the BJP's foreign cell, Mr. Vijay Chauthaiwale. So we see how, and this is the second point that I'm making, is that how India's behavior also changes vis-a-vis Prime Minister Oli. So just a year ago, like I said, there was a lot of bad blood between India and Nepal. In the wake of, and this is the history that India remembers, in the wake of the 2017 election, when Prime Minister Oli comes to power, he does on an anti-India platform. So the Indian establishment was not surprised when PM Oli went out and did all these incredible things like changing his own map. But what is even more interesting is that subsequently, August onwards, there is a change in India's view of Prime Minister Oli. And over the next 4 or 5 or 6 months or so, a new policy is being set in Delhi or being reset in Delhi. And I described to you how these high-profile visits took place. Now, the visit of Mr. Vijay Chauthaiwale is very, very interesting because he's the head of the BJP's foreign policy cell, very close to Home Minister Amit Shah and, of course, to Prime Minister Modi. And he is being seen as somebody who's representative of the Prime Minister and who carries weight. So his word carries weight in Kathmandu. Now, you would ask me, why is this happening? Why has India changed its behavior? So over several conversations with people in Delhi and in Nepal, both foreign policy observers, officials, journalists, Nepali watchers, both Indian and Nepali, I have come to the following conclusions. The first is that India's new policy in Nepal or on Nepal is a super pragmatic policy, which means India has decided that it's going to take a hands-off approach. It is not going to, within quotes, interfere in Nepal's internal politics. So let K P Oli do what he wants, let Madhav Nepal do what he wants, let the Nepali Congress do what it wants. And basically India is only going to position itself on the bilateral framework, which is on India, Nepal, and how to push that. Now, this hands-off approach I am arguing here is actually a very clever one, because within quotes, by doing nothing, what you're doing is that you're turning a blind eye to K P Oli's mangling of his own Nepali constitution. And the fact is, and you would ask, why is India turning a blind eye and why is India being so quiet? Especially if you remember in 2006, and some of you may be old enough to remember, in 2006, a big Jan Andolan, a people's movement took place in Nepal, and the Nepalese king at the time had to step down. It was a very, very peaceful transition of power from the monarchy. At the time, King Gyanendra was the king of Nepal, and he had to step down because there was protests on the streets of Kathmandu as well as elsewhere in the country. For 19 days, that protest lasted. I was there, I covered that protest over a few days, the last few days, which were truly fascinating because you saw how a peaceful transition of power takes place from a monarchy to a sovereign democratic republic. Now, this happened in 2006, and over the next few years, India, which was very, very deeply and very closely involved, both with the Maoists who had committed a great deal of human rights violations in the past by killing, its cadres had killed innocent civilians, hundreds of them, some say even thousands of them, and how India brought not just the Maoists on board, but brought all the sides on board in what was then called a 12-point action plan. So all the parties came together and promised that they would write a constitution, a Nepali constitution that would essentially, the foundations of which would be a free, fair, sovereign, democratic republic with equal rights for all citizens. Now, it has taken a while for Nepal to write that constitution, so to cut a long story short, in 2015, Nepal finally wrote that constitution. And there was a lot of figuratively, blood and tears were shed in the writing of that constitution, because there was a lot of sort of back and forth between the Madhesis, the people who live in the Terai, which is adjoining India, especially along the states of UP, Bihar and Uttarakhand, and the what they call the Brahman Kshetris, or the Brahman Kshatriya people, the hill people who live in Kathmandu, who have had a traditionally have had some say an uncomfortable relationship with both of them. So maybe I'm digressing, but just wanted to give you a little bit of the history of the very, very close India-Nepal relationship and how India helped enormously in the writing of the Nepali constitution. So now today, if the Modi government says that we are going to take a hands-off approach, let the Nepalese do what they want. If they want to destroy the constitution, they're most welcome to do it. That, I think, is not just unfair to the Nepalis, but is unfair to India. Because here is a country on your northern border, an open border, several thousand Nepalis work in India. We share language, we share religion, culture, history. It is a relationship like no other between India and Nepal. And India has been always hugely invested in Nepal's present as well as future. Of course, India has made several mistakes over the last several decades. We can talk about that another time. But the fact is that when India helps in the transformation of the monarchy into a sovereign democratic republic, and today Nepal's constitution is being mangled and India is taking a hands-off approach. So the third point that I'd like to make in this video is, why is India doing it? And I have no real answers, or I don't have any full answers, shall we say. But my reading of the Nepali press, of course the English press in Nepal, and conversations with several Nepalis brings me to the following conclusions. The first is that Prime Minister Oli has realized that he will have to get Prime Minister Modi on board. And he has found a way to do it, which is to appear to be a Hindu Prime Minister of Nepal. Now, until the monarchy was in power, which was in 2006, Nepal was the world's last Hindu kingdom. Today it is a republic where all people of all religions are equal. So Prime Minister Oli is making a big show of his Hinduness, shall we say. So in December he goes to the Pashupatinath temple, which is not just a very beautiful temple, but it holds great meaning for all Hindus all over the world. I myself have been there, and it is a very, very beautiful place, and you get a great deal of peace just by standing in those premises. And I would advise all of you, even if you're not Hindu, to just visit it if you go to Nepal, because it is quite an incredible space, and it has a great deal of history behind it. So Prime Minister Oli goes to the Pashupatinath temple, the first communist prime minister, because don't forget, he's a communist party leader, the first communist prime minister to go to a temple, ordering gold ornaments for the deity, which is unusual in itself. And this Ram Navami in April, he has this big puja for the idols of Ram, Sita and Lakshman, and subsequently orders their installation at a place called Ayodhya Puri, which he names in the Chitwan area. And on the eve of Ram Navami, the pro-monarchy party, the RPP, the Rashtriya Prajatantra Party, also merges with K P Oli's party. So this is the situation today. K P Oli has asked Vidya Bhandari, the president, to dissolve the House. Elections are going to take place in November. He does not have a majority in the House, because as we have subsequently seen, in the wake of the dissolution of the House, 4 former prime ministers of Nepal have gone to the Supreme Court and submitted signatures of 149 members of parliament. Each of them have been signed and said that this recommendation to dissolve the House as null and void, and the Supreme Court should throw it out just like it did earlier in March. Under these circumstances, for India to have a hands-off foreign policy in Nepal, I would argue, is not in India's national interest, and nor is it in Nepal's national interest. Because India and Nepal, two very close sisterly nations, must work together to promote a democratic future. And right now, the way it seems is that if K P Oli is mangling that future and he is willing to do anything that it takes just so that he remains in power, India should be able to see through his games and not fall for his shenanigans. This is Jyoti Malhotra. Please do read my column in ThePrint and do let me know what you think about this video. Thank you so much for watching.